So thank you, Dwayne.
Another round of applause for Andy Dreisman, project manager. Okay, so Andy, come on back and the other team. Now we're going to transition into the Q&A with this incredible team, and then we're going to go to our second part of the show. What we're going to do is we're going to start here in the audience. Then we're going to go to social media, and then we're going to go to the phone bridge. So, and please wait for the mic, give your name and affiliation, and if you can address it to a specific person, that'll be great. We're going to take a few minutes for Q&A, and the gentleman at the hat here. Name and affiliation, please.
I am Jim Siegel. Yeah. And I'm with Spaceflight Insider. I have a question about the spacecraft itself. I believe it's going to make 24 or so circuits through the corona. What happens to the spacecraft after that?
So that's correct. It makes 24 orbits around the sun. 7 of them interact Venus. And on orbit 24, what I'm hoping is we're going to continue to go. I mean, as long as we have propellant on board, we're going to continue to take science data. Eventually, the spacecraft will run out of propellant. At that point, at some point in the future, it'll lose attitude control, and those sensitive bits of the spacecraft, which we work so hard to protect, will eventually transition to the sun. So the way I like to think about it is that in hopefully a long, long period of time, 10, 20 years, there's going to be a carbon disk floating around the sun in its orbit, and that carbon disk will be around till the end of the solar system.
Marcia Dunn, Associated Press. You couldn't have asked for a better opening act last year with the eclipse, as was mentioned. Do you really think that sparked a lot of more interest in this mission and brought a lot more attention to what you're about to accomplish?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think that it made everybody look to the sky. It made everybody realize that the sun is not just a single point of light, but it has profound effects on us here at Earth. Thomas talked about some of the catastrophic events with the space weather that we see, and it really did bring up an awareness. I mean, it's a beautiful sight. My goodness, we saw the corona. I got very excited, but we saw the corona, and you don't see that every day. Well, Parker Solar Probe's going to be in there, and I think just realizing that we were sending a piece of technology that is going to go into that region that was visible during that amazing eclipse. To me, it's still mind-blowing, and I've worked on the mission for 8 years, and even I still go, really? We're doing that? I think it did an awful lot to really bring up the awareness, but also for the entire heliophysics and the amazing fleet that NASA has, and with that, I'll throw it to Thomas.
To me, my experience during that eclipse was just that. So first of all, I actually didn't realize how emotional I'm going to get. When I've been studying the solar corona for 20 years, and I saw it for the first time with my eyes, right? It's like, that's an amazing moment. But I remember, actually there's video footage that says that within seconds of that, it's like, this is where Parker's going to go, right? You immediately see, it's like, you see it there. It's totally in the dark there. That's how close it's going to be. And so for me, that, I think, made a huge difference. I do believe, actually, the name made a huge difference, too, for many people. Kind of stories, personal stories attached to this story of perseverance, of innovation, a story of being right, ultimately, in the face of adversity. I think those stories, they matter. And they're stories that are out there in the community, and we all resonate with. And I think the final part is just really, once you come up with the recognition that it really is the equivalent of touching the sun, kind of flying through its atmosphere. Kind of, that's the spark, right? Kind of, it's like it pulls you in that emotional state that you can't forget the mission about. So what we're recognizing at NASA this is one of the missions has a tremendous following, tremendous excitement, and kind of over and above many of the other missions that we have, just because of this trifecta, I would argue, of values.
And Marcia, stay tuned, because in discussions they're doing something pretty special on the anniversary, which is in a few weeks for the solar eclipse on August 21. So you guys stay tuned for that. What we're going to do is take one more question, then we're going to go to social media, and then we're going to go to the phone bridge. Name and affiliation, please.
Ranvir Arisene with the Astronomy Outreach of Kosovo and the Talking Space. So since these sensors will be kind of outside the edge of the main heat shield, what's stopping them from melting, and what are they made of exactly?
So most of the instruments, as Andy noted, are on the main body of the spacecraft, and they are at a very balmy 30 degrees centigrade, 85 degrees Fahrenheit, compared to the 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit that our heat shield is seeing. We do have the 4 fields whips that stick out. They are made of niobium, so they are very thin tubes. They get hot, but they're not so difficult. The Solar Probe Cup is the bravest little instrument on the spacecraft. It bravely peeps around the heat shield, and it is a fairly big instrument. And so there was an enormous amount of testing that went into that. It is made from some pretty exotic materials. It has molybdenum, it has molybdenum, it has niobium, and it also has a lot of tungsten. And so it had to go through a very, very, very rigorous test program. In fact, they even designed their own test facility at the Smithsonian Astrophysics Observatory at Harvard, where they could really create the atmosphere that it was going to have to see every day to make sure that it wouldn't do anything bad.
Great. Let's take some questions from the social media folks in the room. Do we have a question here? Yes, sir. Oh, please wait for the microphone. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Chuck Fields, Online Coffee Break. I had a question. I understand the carbon-carbon is going to protect the spacecraft, but what's the duration of the spacecraft when it goes through the corona? I understand it might vary on each orbit, but how long will it actually be in the temperature of the corona?
So the spacecraft's in elliptical orbit. Think of it, its furthest distance from the sun is around Venus, and then every time it flies by Venus, the perihelion, or closest approach, gets lower and lower. From our perspective, the science taking is from a quarter AU on the inbound to a quarter AU on the outbound, so a quarter astronomical unit. I believe that the spacecraft's always in the atmosphere of the sun, as is the Earth.
I would argue that, yes, strongly. Always. We live in the atmosphere of the sun.
We do live in the atmosphere of the sun. Thank you very much. So it's about 12 days is the way we think about it.
Okay, we're going to go to the phone next, and then we'll come back for social media. I know we have a lot of questions. We may not get to them, but we have some other opportunities to answer your questions. So we're going to go to the phone bridge, and I believe we have Denise Chow from NBC News. Denise?
Hi, thanks for taking my question. With the Parker Solar Probe sort of set to become the fastest ever human-made object, I'm wondering if you can...
So from a speed perspective, there isn't much of a concern. The spacecraft doesn't know it's going fast. What is maybe more interesting and a little esoteric is that around the sun there's a hypervelocity dust environment. So that's really what the speed gets you. So the spacecraft intercepts dust particles, and the spacecraft has shielding on board. It's built into the blankets. It's built around the cooling system. And this Kevlar shielding protects the spacecraft from this, what we call hypervelocity dust environment. So that's probably the biggest impact, no pun intended, of going fast.
We have one more question now from the people who have been using hashtag AskNASA to ask a question. So let's go to that question, and then we will be taking questions at the end again.
Back in March, members of the public were invited to send their name to the sun aboard the Parker Solar Probe spacecraft. Twitter user David, who goes by @KnowStuff on Twitter, asked, what will happen to all of our names aboard the craft?
So your names will continue to orbit with the spacecraft, and even after we have no fuel, as Andy said, he thinks about the carbon disk circulating, going around the sun. I think of the spacecraft will break up into large pieces and then smaller and smaller until it becomes part of the dust cloud. So your name is going to orbit the sun forever.
Fantastic.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
let's take one more question, and then one more. Then we're going to wrap up and bring you the second part of the show here. Right here with the mic. Where's the mic? Oh, you have the mic.
Hi, Ken Kramer, Rocket STEM and Space Up Close. Thanks for doing this. You talked about took 60 years for the technology to catch up You mentioned specifically the heat shield. What else on the spacecraft? Maybe the science instruments took 60 years of development.
I mean, certainly finding the right materials. It isn't just a case of surviving those incredible heat when we're close to the sun. As we've all mentioned, we come out around Venus and it's cold there, which means that these materials have to withstand heating and then cooling, very, very, very extreme changes in temperature, 24 and then apparently another 10 years beyond that, according to Andy. So, you know, they have to be, they have to be incredibly durable. So certainly the materials, and then I often liken, you know, 60 years ago, if you wanted to make a phone call, you had a rotary dial phone that was on your kitchen wall. Now we all use smartphones, and we use them, I bet you, for everything other than making a phone call. If I have to make a phone call, I've broken down any other way of communicating with somebody, and now I've actually got to call them. Because of the way our technology has changed, the way we live has changed. And if you think about the technology you hold in your hand, in your iPhone, and you compare that to what that would have taken in 1958, you're talking city blocks worth of buildings of that type of thing to be able to do the autonomy that Andy was talking about. So there are, you know, lightweighting, miniaturization, materials, everything that goes into making the spacecraft small, compact, and light enough so that our wonderful launch folks can give us the kick we need to go into orbit.
Do you mind if I add one point about the instruments? I really believe that, I think, just in the same realm as Nikki talks about the spacecraft, the instruments have also benefited from multiple generations of instruments that have flown on spacecraft that are, say, spacecraft like Stereo, spacecraft like Wind, or the Advanced Composition Explorer, or others, in which some of these instruments were for the first time really perfected and then integrated and made smaller. The instruments are in every way as advanced as the mission that the spacecraft is around it, I would argue. Kind of a really, really top-notch instruments that, with the mass that is available, which of course is limited, because we want to use every single pound for fuel, right? Because we want to go in there with that, within those limitations. Those are instruments that were not possible to build even 40, 30 years ago. We had to do the other ones first.
Okay, that's going to do it. Please give a nice round of applause again to Dr. Z, Nikki Fox, and Andy Dreisman. Thank you all.
All right, we are going to get started next talking about the launch itself.
That's right. And if you're just joining us, again, we're coming to you live from NASA's Kennedy Space Center, where we're just a few days away from an early morning launch of humanity's first mission to touch the sun. My name is Dwayne Brown with the Office of Communications, my colleague Karen Fox. So we've heard about the science and everything. Now, the folks that are going to make some noise and fire and all this good stuff. The person who I've had the honor of working with many years, the launch director for this incredible mission. His name is, you know, synonymous with great launch missions. Please welcome to the stage the launch director for the Parker Solar Probe mission, Omar Baez.
Thank you. Thank you for all attending. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm super excited. This is the first time that NASA is launching a Delta IV Heavy with a third stage and flying a science instrument on board it. We've flown other Delta IV Heavies, but not with science. And this is really cool to be able to get science that Gene here envisioned 60 years ago and finally getting it to fly. I work for the Launch Services Program here at NASA Kennedy Space Center. I am fortunate to be the launch director. I've been the launch director on numerous missions since 2000, and this rocket's just humbling for me. 430,000 miles per hour. The closest that came to that was Pluto New Horizons. When it left here, it was going 32,000 miles per hour, give or take. So quite a difference. And the next fastest, I believe, is going 150, 175,000 miles an hour now, which is one of the Mariner probes. So the speed is phenomenal. This vehicle is 233 feet tall. If you get a chance to go out there and see it, it's just, you have to see a human next to it to be able to capture how big this thing is. A like I said, I am from Launch Services Program. What we do is we contract with our partner ULA to build us a launch vehicle and provide us a launch service. We partner with the 45th Space Range and many other partners here and downrange from here to make this mission happen. So I am going to show you a film, if you could, of what it takes to build this rocket starting about a year ago when it arrived here, not built the rocket, but arrived here and assembled it. This is two of the segments arriving. There's three of these of the common booster cores. They're going to Complex 37 where they'll be bolted together. Here's the process. All three will be bolted together. The second stage is on front. That will be erected. That happened in April of this year, along with Parker arriving on April 1st, Easter Day. It's just mind-boggling how big that really is. Here's Parker Solar Probe inside of the fairing, and within there is the third stage. This is it being erected about 10 days ago and being put on top of the second stage and bolted down. So about a week, or beginning of this week, we had our flight readiness review. That's where we get a bunch of mucky-mucks together and we talk about what's gone on with the launch vehicle technically, how the range is doing. Kathy Winters, our launch weather officer, provides us a synopsis of how the weather instrumentation's doing and what she can give us as far as a forecast at that point. The range tells us how their assets are coming together, and the spacecraft tells us how they're doing and what their readiness is. We turned that around into a mission dress rehearsal, which occurred yesterday. We get the whole team together and we practice the launch countdown, and that was successfully run. We successfully stressed the team, and we're quite ready for what we got ahead of us on Saturday. This morning we had our launch readiness review. That went splendidly. We're successfully complete. We're not working any issues. The next step for us is rolling the tower back, which will occur tomorrow about 6 in the afternoon. About 10 o'clock at night, we'll get a weather brief, and that'll allow our folks to decide whether we're going to load the vehicle with cryogenics. That'll start at about 10:45. It's about a 3.5-hour process. I'll do my last poll roughly at 8 minutes, and at 2 minutes, I'll give them my final go for the government. And we should be launching at 3:33 in the morning. We have a 65-minute window. If we have to go to the following day, it becomes a 3:29 in the morning launch, again, 65-minute window. And that's kind of like, it gets a little bit earlier every day. And that's all I have.
Thank you so much. We're going to talk a little bit more about that Delta IV Heavy. Up next, we have Scott Messer, who can join us. He is the program manager for NASA programs for the United Launch Alliance. We're looking forward to this. Tell us about it.
Thank you very much. And on behalf of the men and women of United Launch Alliance, I want to welcome you to the Parker Solar Probe launch. This is a very, very exciting mission. Every time I hear Nikki and Andy talk, I get more and more excited about this mission. So, as mentioned, we'll be launching on a Delta IV Heavy, which is a 5-meter vehicle in size. Omar mentioned it's about 233 feet tall. When it takes off, the thrust of just the first stage, or the 3 cores, if you will, is about 2.1 million pounds. So we've heard a lot about speed today. United Launch Alliance has launched 6 other missions successfully this year so far, and since our inception, we've had 129 consecutive successful launches. So if you spent 60 years in the making for a mission and 4 million hours getting the spacecraft ready, you'd like to get the most reliable launch vehicle that you can to get there And that's what NASA's done by getting the Delta IV Heavy. So the Heavy can lift about 14,000 pounds to geosynchronous orbit. And on the other hand, Parker Solar Probe weighs 1,400 pounds. So it's a little bit lighter, and so you might ask, why such a large vehicle if you've only got such a small spacecraft? And the answer, we've heard, is speed. All right? This thing goes like nothing ever has gone before, and it is super fast. And in fact, you'd be interested to know, Omar mentioned we also have on top of our Delta IV Heavy a third stage developed by Northrop Grumman. And if you look at the velocity that the vehicle provides compared to the third stage actually provides 2/3 of the speed that the vehicle, the spacecraft is going at separation. And that's because you need all that big giant vehicle to get out of the Earth's gravitational pull and to get up there. And so once we get there, then the third stage only fires for about an hour, about a minute and a half. It's very short, but it imparts a lot of velocity to that third stage. And our Northrop Grumman partners have done a great job in developing that. So with that, let's take a look at the video. I'll kind of show you the sequence of events that will happen on launch day.
5, 4, we have main engine ignition, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the United Launch Alliance Delta IV Heavy rocket.
3 Delta IV RS-68A main engines ignite and generate more than 2.1 million pounds of thrust to lift the rocket away from the pad. Shortly after liftoff, Delta IV begins a pitchover to attain the proper flight path while minimizing the pressure the vehicle experiences during flight. The Delta IV reaches Mach 1, the speed of sound, at 1 minute 18 seconds. At 3 minutes 56 seconds, the port and starboard booster engine shut down. 2 seconds later, the boosters are jettisoned. The center booster engine then throttles to full power to maximize performance. Approaching main engine cutoff, Delta IV is burning propellant at a rate of 1,945 pounds per second, traveling at more than 15,381 miles per hour and located 86 miles in altitude and 415 miles downrange. At 5 minutes 36 seconds, propellant levels deplete and the main engine shuts down. 7 seconds later, the Delta IV separation system activates to release the first stage. The vehicle now weighs a little more than 5% of what it did at liftoff. At 5 minutes 55 seconds, the first Delta cryogenic second stage, or DCSS main engine burn begins. During ascent, the spacecraft is protected inside a 5-meter diameter payload fairing. At approximately 6 minutes 5 seconds, the payload fairing is jettisoned. At 10 minutes 37 seconds, cutoff of the DCSS engine, or MECO-1, occurs. The mission now enters a nearly 12-minute coast phase. At 22 minutes 25 seconds, the DCSS main engine is restarted for the second burn. Approximately 14 minutes later, second cutoff of the DCSS main engine occurs. Following a 30-second coast phase, the third stage is separated to continue carrying Parker's Solar Probe spacecraft on its interplanetary trajectory. 20 seconds later, after the third stage has reached a minimum distance of 50 feet from the DCSS, the third stage is ignited. Approximately 1 minute 29 seconds later, burnout of the third stage solid rocket motor occurs. At 43 minutes 10 seconds, the third stage releases NASA's Parker Solar Probe spacecraft on its journey to the Sun.
So those are the events that will occur on Saturday morning. You got a little bit of a view as you looked at the Parker Solar Probe spacecraft and the big 5-meter size vehicle that you saw there. So NASA chose the Delta IV Heavy because of its unique capabilities to create the speed The last time, I think Omar or somebody mentioned, the last time NASA flew on the Delta IV Heavy was the EFT-1 mission back in 2014. This will be the 9th launch of or the 10th launch of the Delta IV Heavy. The Delta IV Heavy first launched in 2004, so almost 14 years ago, and only 10 launches. So you can see we don't, the Heavy is not something we launch all that often. So it's a very exciting for us as well as the spacecraft. And as mentioned earlier, United Launch Alliance, we pride ourselves on making sure that our customers get all of their requirements met and are fully successful in getting it there. So we want to say thank you once again to all of our mission partners and to NASA for allowing us to participate in this very exciting mission. And I'll just close with a go Delta, go Parker Solar Probe.
Thank you so much. So we've been hearing all about all the things we have done to prepare for this launch, but we have one last thing that needs to go right, and that is the weather. To tell us a little bit about that, we have Kathy Rice. She is the launch weather officer with the 45th Weather Squadron with the Air Force right here at Cape Canaveral.
Thank you. Thanks. I am super excited about this mission, and I'm really excited about the 3:33 a.m. launch time. Because in the summertime here in Florida, 3:33 p.m. is very bad, and 3:33 a.m. is very good. We do expect to see these afternoon thunderstorms each day, but as the day goes on and we get into the evening, they'll dissipate. And then we'll just have to watch out for anything that forms offshore. Sometimes at night, that air cools, the water's a little warmer than the air, you get a little warming of the air just above the water, you get some rising air, and you start getting some cumulus clouds offshore. But that happens more over the Gulf Stream, so it's looking more on the favorable side for launch. We will be dealing with a little bit of thunderstorm activity around the time of the mobile service tower roll tomorrow evening, but it should be finishing around that time, so it's looking good as we get into that operation and then moving forward into the countdown. So again, we'll just be watching for some clouds that we get concerned about for triggered lightning threat. We can trigger a lightning strike with a launch. And so it's not just a thunderstorm we're concerned about. We're also concerned about towering cumulus clouds or the tops of thunderstorms we call anvil clouds that come off and spread. So there's more than just the risk of natural lightning. We also are concerned about triggered lightning. So let's go ahead and look at the satellite picture for today. You can see that we do have that west coast sea breeze making its way across. We're in a southwest flow pattern. What that means for us is our sea breeze forms and kind of gets pinned along the coast. The west coast sea breeze moves across and merges, and so we get a lot of thunderstorm activity in the afternoons, particularly in the late afternoon in this type of pattern. We're expecting this to continue for the next several days. But the early morning hours are good in this type of pattern, so that's good for us. So let's go ahead and move into the launch forecast. You can see that we do have light winds. We're really not worried about winds because the gradients, the pressure gradient's really light over the area. Temperature is always around the upper 70s to low 80s in the overnight hours here. And our only concerns will be offshore weather mostly, but anything coming within 10 nautical miles of us we'll be watching. So any cumulus clouds, any detached or attached anvil clouds, those clouds that come off of the top of the thunderstorms heading our direction. The winds in the upper levels will be from the east, and so we'll be watching that. Just paying attention to that. With that, we have a 30% chance of violating launch weather constraints. So 70% chance go. Okay, and for our 24-hour forecast, we are looking a little bit worse. The relative humidity in the atmosphere gets a little higher. It gives us better chance for clouds in the area. So with that, I did increase the number to a 40% chance of violating launch constraints. And finally, if we happen to go one more day, it does get a lot drier. So I dropped the chance of just a 20% chance. But you can see each day the winds are light. It's really all about the clouds in the area and that triggered lightning threat. So overall, good launch time. So hopefully we have some good weather.
Thank you. If we can have the team come up for the Q&A here. And again, if you're joining us, we're coming to you live from the NASA Kennedy Space Center in Florida, a few days before the early morning launch of the Parker Solar Probe. And now we're going to go on the Q&A section here. And what better way, Karen, to celebrate the 60th anniversary to be here for the Solar Parker Probe, right? I mean, this is fantastic. So we're going to start again here with media, and please wait for the mic and give your name and affiliation. We'll go to social media and the phone bridge, and then we will wrap it up. So right here.
Stephen Young with Astronomy Now and Spaceflight Now for Omar. We've seen lots of different launch times. They keep changing. Normally with a planetary mission, we think that these things are written in stone. Is there a reason why the launch times are so fluid with this mission? And then I have a follow-up.
So, it's on, okay. So there had been some, with the shifts in the days, the delays since the opening of the window, there had been some shifts. We started this with a 2-hour window. And as we looked at the trajectory, we realized that we are coming close to the Van Allen belts as we fly out. So we have a radiation concern on the launch vehicle as we fly near the Van Allen belts, which we have to stay away from because it could mess with our electronics, and we don't want that to happen on the way up. And so you'll see the window cut off at 65 minutes. We had been playing with different analysis to see what was the better option. So I wasn't firm on how large our window was. I would say about from anywhere from 45 minutes to 65. We're now at 65. There's opportunities later in the window where it expands to about 70 minutes. But after that point, the risk of seeing an upset on the way up increases dramatically. The very beginning of the window had some constraints early on with the spacecraft being able to be picked up by a station in South Africa, Hartbeespoort, and so there was a risk trade that had to be made as to whether that station was needed, along with another station that's further downrange that could see the spacecraft on its initial separation. So that's why there was a shift. Okay?
The final last-minute problems you had getting out of Astrotech and on the way to the launch pad, could you just address those issues and how you resolved them?
Sure.
And also how you got a couple of extra days at the end of the launch opportunity.
Okay, so let me address we had 2 delays on the way out. First, we were dealing with a very sensitive instrument purge that keeps the instruments on the spacecraft purged with nitrogen to keep any of the environment away from it, moisture, dust, whatever it may be that we have here that these instruments don't like to see, and you want to maintain them in pristine condition when you go out to do the science. So we did have some problems with some leaks in that purge as it threads its way up through the adapter cone through the 3rd stage. And so that cost us a couple of days. After we were done with that, we did have an issue where we damaged the electrical connector we had to separate the stage again, or the fairing, to get at this connector, repair it, and get it back together. And finally, we had some issue with a minor weather stripping foam is the best analogy I can give you that you would use around the home that has adhesive on one side. Well, that foam started to liberate itself from the sides of the fairing. So we had to separate the fairing again, clean off all that foam, account for all those pieces, and make those stages back together. So that cost us, as you know, we started this on the 30th, we took a delay to the 4th, then we took a delay to the 6th, and we took a delay finally to the 11th. That's where we're at now. How we were able to get the additional 4 days, that had been in the works for quite some time. From the launch vehicle perspective, we actually had that in work over a year ago to add those additional days. The spacecraft hadn't had a chance to add those days, so that came in very late for us. That's why we expanded it from the 19th to the 23rd, fairly late for the public's knowledge, until the spacecraft was able to go analyze and plan for those days. And that's how we had those additional 4 days. But that is the cliff.
Okay, before we go to social, You have the mic, so real quick question.
It's quick. Sawyer Rosenstein with Talking Space. Question about that upper third stage. So I know that's not very common with these science missions. So what exactly is the planned parking orbit for the Delta IV's first and second stage? And then how much extra speed is that third stage going to give in miles per hour or something like that?
You want to give it a shot, Scott?
So what I can tell you as far as the speed is that our requirement is a measurement of the velocity called C3. And the first and second stage of the Delta IV get us to a C3 of about 50, 52, and the third stage then takes us from 50 to 152. So like I said, about 2/3 of the actual velocity after we get out of the Earth's atmosphere. The other stages will be, so the second stage and the third stage, they're on a course to leave the atmosphere, so they just go, and there's no parking stage with those. And the first, the cores will fall back down into the ocean.
Great, so now we'll take a question over here from the social media side.
Jack, is this on? Is this on now? Okay. Jack Sauter with YouTube. Is there any contingency planned in case the third stage doesn't ignite, or is the likelihood so low that you'll just get there if you get there?
So there is no contingency plan because like most of the stuff in the rocket, it has to work the first time. We're not something that can upload a command like sometimes you hear the spacecraft do if they have a problem. Everything has to work the first time. So we go through a very rigorous test program to make sure that we have the maximum probability that everything is going to work as appropriate. The engine that we use on the third stage is an engine that's flown many times. The Star 48 motor has flown hundreds and hundreds of times, and ignition has always been successful. So we just have to go through the process of testing and designing and testing and designing and testing and to make sure that we have the maximum probability that everything is going to work.
All right, we still have time for a few more questions, but we're getting close to the end of the show. I want to make sure we get in a question from the users who wrote in with Ask NASA as their hashtag.
A Twitter user named Brady asks, how long did it take to develop the technology to survive the simultaneous fusions occurring in the sun?
I
think that's a spacecraft.
Andy, do you want to?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. A user by the name of Brady on Twitter asked, how long did it take to develop the technology that will survive the simultaneous fusions occurring in the sun?
Well, fusion is what powers the sun, so that's deep down in the heart of the sun. We're going close, but we're not going that close. So at 4 million miles off the surface, the temperatures are about 2 to 3 million degrees Fahrenheit. The spacecraft flies through that plasma. The plasma is very rarefied. It's not very dense, so the spacecraft doesn't pick up a lot of heat from that environment.
Okay, thank you.
One last question from our social here, and then we'll wrap up.
All right,
We
anybody
good?
else over here?
Oh.
Thank you.
This might also be for the science team, but I know Parker Solar Probe has a lot of scientific instruments, but then there's like Juno, which has JunoCam for public outreach. Will Parker Solar Probe have anything like that?
No, we only carry exactly what we need for the science. As we noted, we have to be incredibly light, we don't carry anything extra. And so our instruments are there to do the job that they are meant to do. We do have a white light imager, and we will be providing you with the first ever look at the sun's corona. So there's no sort of add-on camera on there. We are doing all science with our instruments 24/7.
Let's give a nice round of applause for our launch team here. Thank you all.
So you can stay part of the conversation going to our Twitter handle at NASA Sun and using the hashtag #SolarProbe. And of course, we expect everybody to be watching this live on nasa.gov/live at 3 a.m. That's coverage starts.
Yeah. Launch coverage starts at 3 a.m. Eastern. Please look out for updates. And before we close the show, just a reminder, we have a fantastic contingent of scientists, principal investigators, engineers, and technical folks to answer your questions. For the folks on the phone bridge and watching live on TV, they'll be at the press site, and then call the press site. There are plenty of incredible folks that can give you interviews, and there's a lot of excitement and buzz. So we're going to conclude here today. Lots of excitement. www.nasa.gov/Parker, right? And I think we're ready to sign off.
We just got one last countdown for you.
Right?
Ready?
So, we guys ready? 3, 2, 1.
Go,
Parker
Solar Probe!
Thank you all. See you at launch on Saturday.